You won't believe what happened when I invited my nephew Luke to stay over. It turned into one of the most mind-blowing nights I've ever experienced, and I've got to share it with you because, honestly, I'm still trying to make sense of it all. So, this was just a few days ago. Luke, now 20 and no longer the lanky teenager I remember, was coming for a visit. I was nervous, smoothing out the bedspread for the 10th time, a habit I have when I'm hosting. It's been ages since we've really hung out. He's always been this quiet, charming guy. When he knocked on the door, I was momentarily taken aback. He's grown so much, taller, broader, his voice deeper. "Hey, Aunt Ellie," he said with a grin, stepping in with his suitcase. The familiarity of his presence was comforting, yet strangely charged. "Come in, you must be tired," I replied, welcoming him. His confident, easygoing demeanor was new, catching me off guard. We exchanged pleasantries, and I showed him to the guest room, feeling an odd mix of pride and something else I couldn't quite place. Dinner was simple: grilled chicken, veggies, and some wine, mostly for me to calm my nerves. Luke appreciated the meal, complimenting my cooking in a way that made me blush. As we talked, his life unfolded before me: college, work, friends. His voice was warm, his stories engaging, and there was this moment when he looked at me in a way that felt different. "You just seem happy," he observed, which threw me off, but in a good way. After dinner, we cleaned up together. Standing there, washing dishes side by side, there was this undeniable connection, a silent understanding. "Thanks for having me," he said softly, his eyes meeting mine, creating a moment that felt like it stretched forever. This visit, what started as just family catching up, turned into something unexpectedly intimate and profound. It made me question a lot about relationships, connections, and the surprises life throws at you. So, that's my story. Ever had a family visit that turned your world upside down? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from my life. Until next time, keep an open heart to the mysteries of family. The air felt charged with an unspoken sincerity, wrapping around me like a warm embrace. I wanted to say something, anything to break the tension that was building, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. The moment passed, and the young man turned back to the dishes, his movements easy and unhurried, yet the memory of his gaze lingered, burning like a brand in my mind. The evening continued after the chores were done. He wandered into the living room, and I followed, drawn by his presence like it was magnetic. He sank onto the couch with an easy familiarity, his long legs stretched out, and patted the cushion beside him. I hesitated for just a moment before sitting next to him, feeling the subtle shift in the atmosphere. It wasn't the first time we'd sat there together, but tonight felt different. The house was silent except for the hum of the ceiling fan and the warm glow of the floor lamp. I reached for the remote, thinking to distract myself with some TV, but he took it with a teasing smile, choosing something himself. He scrolled through the options, a playful look in his eyes. I leaned back, laughing silently to myself, thinking about how he used to make me watch those action films. Not terrible classics, he would argue, but to me, they were classically bad. He settled on a nature documentary, the kind with a soothing narrator and stunning visuals of wildlife. It should have been relaxing, but I was all too aware of his closeness, the warmth of his arm brushing against mine. Out of the corner of his eye, he seemed to check on me, a small smile playing on his lips. I quickly looked away, feeling my heart race with a mix of confusion and awareness. I forced a laugh when he seemed to notice my quietness, attributing it to tiredness. But my thoughts were a whirlwind, noticing details about him I hadn't before, the way his t-shirt fit, how the light caught his jawline. It was maddening, this sudden awareness, and I chided myself for it, remembering our relation. He didn't seem to notice my internal battle, comfortably settling back, his arm resting casually along the back of the couch. The space he created felt inviting, and I found myself leaning slightly into it. As the documentary played, my attention was less on the screen and more on him. The subtle movements, the way his fingers drummed against his jeans. When he shifted closer, I felt a jolt of awareness, my heart pounding so loudly I feared it was audible. He seemed to sense my tension, his voice low and concerned as he asked if something was bothering me. I quickly dismissed his concern with a laugh, though my voice betrayed me. He studied me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable, suggesting I seemed distracted, carrying something heavy. I dismissed it as his imagination, but his probing tone made me feel exposed. The documentary ended, leaving a comfortable yet charged silence. He stretched, announced he was heading to bed, and I nodded, feeling a pang in my chest as he stood. His good night was soft, genuine, thanking for the evening. As he walked away, I remained seated, the warmth of the night lingering, leaving me to ponder the complexities of family bonds and the unexpected turns they can take. Of his presence lingering in the room, my thoughts were a tangled mess, a mix of confusion, longing, and something deeper I couldn't quite name. But the story didn't end there. I told myself it was nothing, that I was overthinking, but the ache in my chest told a different story. Something had shifted between us tonight, something I couldn't ignore. And as I turned off the lights and made my way to bed, I knew this was only the beginning. And after all, I was right. But tonight, nothing happened. Not yet. The morning light streamed through the curtains, casting a soft glow over the living room where I sat with my coffee. I'd been up for hours, unable to shake the thoughts that had swirled in my mind since the night before. The way he had looked at me, the warmth in his voice, it all lingered like a song stuck on repeat. I heard his footsteps before I saw him. He walked into the room, his hair slightly tousled from sleep, wearing a casual t-shirt and joggers that hung perfectly on his lean frame. His easy smile added to his charm. "Morning," he said, his voice low and gravelly from sleep. "Of course," he replied, his smile soft. "That's what family's for." The day unfolded lazily. Luke stayed close by, his presence a constant and comforting hum in the background. We fell into an easy rhythm, cleaning up the house, preparing lunch together, and chatting about everything and nothing. It was the kind of day that felt timeless, like the world had slowed down just for us. At one point, we found ourselves in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for a salad. He stood beside me, his arm brushing mine occasionally as he worked. Each touch sent a small jolt through me, and I found myself hyper-aware of every movement he made. "You're quiet today," he said, glancing at me. "Just focused," I replied quickly, though the truth was far more complicated. "Good morning," I replied, hoping my voice sounded steady. He plopped onto the couch, his presence filling the room with an effortless energy. "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep," I admitted, taking a sip of coffee. He tilted his head, his hazel eyes studying me. "Something on your mind?" I shook my head, brushing off the question. "Just a lot to do today." Luke leaned back, stretching his arms along the top of the couch. "Well, if there's anything I can do to help, let me know." His offer was simple, but the sincerity in his tone made my chest tighten. "Thanks, Luke," I said. He smiled knowingly, but didn't press further. Instead, he reached over, stealing a piece of cucumber from the cutting board. "Hey!" I protested, swatting at his hand, but he laughed, popping it into his mouth. "Best chef's privilege," he teased, his grin mischievous. I couldn't help but laugh, the sound light and genuine. Moments like these felt so natural, so easy, yet beneath the surface, there was an undercurrent of something deeper, something unspoken. Later, we found ourselves back in the living room. Luke lounged on the couch, his legs stretched out while I curled up in the armchair with a book. The soft murmur of music played from the speakers, filling the silence between us. And at one point, I looked up to find him watching me, his gaze steady and thoughtful. "What?" I asked, feeling self-conscious under his scrutiny. "Nothing," he said, his lips curving into a small smile. "You just seem different." "Different how?" I asked, my heart skipping a beat. He shrugged, his eyes never leaving mine. "I don't know. Happier, maybe. More alive." His words caught me off guard, and I didn't know how to respond. The intensity of his gaze made my pulse quicken, and I felt a warmth spread through me that I couldn't quite name. "Thanks, I guess," I said softly, looking away. But Luke didn't let it drop. "I mean it. You deserve to feel that way all the time." His voice was so sincere, so full of care, that it made my chest ache. I wanted to respond, to tell him how much his words meant to me, but the lump in my throat made it impossible. Instead, I nodded, offering him a small smile that I hoped conveyed everything I couldn't say. The afternoon wore on, and as the sun dipped lower in the sky, the atmosphere between us grew heavier. It was as if the air itself had thickened, charged with an unspoken tension that neither of us dared to acknowledge. Luke stood from the couch, stretching lazily before glancing at me. "I think I'm going to take a shower," he said, his tone casual. "Okay," I replied, my voice quieter than I intended. As he disappeared down the hallway, I let out a shaky breath, my emotions swirling in a chaotic storm. There was something about the way he looked at me, the way he spoke, that left me feeling unsteady, like the ground beneath my feet had shifted. I tried to distract myself, picking up my book again, but the words blurred together, my mind refusing to focus. The sound of the shower running in the distance only added to my restlessness, and I found myself pacing the room, my thoughts racing. When Luke returned, his hair damp and his t-shirt clinging slightly to his chest, he looked at me with a softness that made my heart skip a beat. "Feel better?" I asked, my voice light but betraying the flutter in my chest. "Yeah," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Thanks." He sat back down on the couch, his presence grounding me even as it made my pulse quicken. The tension between us was palpable now, a quiet hum that neither of us could ignore. The evening crept in slowly, the sky outside turning shades of orange and pink. Luke suggested we watch a movie, and I agreed, hoping the distraction would ease the weight of the air between us. But as we sat side by side on the couch, the space between us felt too small, too charged. Every time his arm brushed against mine, it was like an electric current, reminding me of the night before, of the unspoken question hanging between us. Against mine, my breath hitched, and I could feel the heat radiating from his skin. At one point, he shifted closer, his leg pressing against mine, and the contact sent a jolt through me that I couldn't ignore. I glanced at him, my heart pounding, but he was focused on the screen, his expression unreadable. It was maddening, this dance we seemed to be doing, skirting the edges of something unspoken, something neither of us dared to name. And yet, the pull between us was undeniable, a magnetic force that refused to be ignored. As the credits rolled, Luke turned to me, his hazel eyes meeting mine. "Thanks for today," he said softly, his voice carrying a weight that made my chest tighten. "You don't have to thank me," I replied, my voice trembling slightly. "I'm glad you're here." His gaze lingered on mine, and for a moment, it felt as though the world had stopped, the only sound the soft hum of the music still playing in the background. And then he smiled, a small, genuine smile that made my heart ache in the best way possible. "Good night, Aunt Ellie," he said, standing and disappearing down the hallway. As I sat there in the quiet of the living room, my thoughts a whirlwind, I knew that this was only the beginning. Something had shifted between us, something that couldn't be undone, and as much as it terrified me, it also filled me with a sense of anticipation that I couldn't deny. The hours of the night stretched long and slow after Luke disappeared down the hallway. I found myself rooted in the same spot on the couch, my thoughts tangled in a web of confusion, longing, and fear. The quiet of the house, once comforting, now felt stifling as my mind replayed every moment of the day. Eventually, I stood, feeling the ache in my legs from sitting too long. The soft hum of the music had faded, leaving the room wrapped in silence. I wandered toward the kitchen, hoping a glass of water would calm the fluttering in my chest. But just as I reached the sink, I heard the soft creak of the floorboards behind me. I turned, my breath catching as I saw Luke standing in the doorway. He was barefoot, wearing a loose t-shirt and pajama pants, his hair still slightly damp from his shower. His expression was unreadable, but there was a quiet intensity in his eyes that sent a shiver down my spine. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He shook his head, stepping into the kitchen. "No, I guess not. What about you?" I glanced down at the glass in my hand. "Same. Too much on my mind, I suppose." He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms over his chest. "Anything you want to talk about?" His question caught me off guard, and I hesitated, unsure how to answer. The weight of the day, the weight of him, hung heavy between us, unspoken but undeniable. "I don't know," I admitted, setting the glass down. "Sometimes it's hard to put things into words." Luke nodded, his gaze steady and thoughtful. "I get that." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, but it was charged, filled with the tension that had been simmering between us all day. Finally, he pushed off the counter and took a step closer, his movement slow and deliberate. "Aunt Ellie," he said softly, his voice carrying a weight that made my pulse quicken. I want to say something, but I don't want to make things weird." My heart pounded as I looked up at him, his hazel eyes searching mine. "You can say whatever's on your mind, Luke." He hesitated, his jaw tightening as though he was trying to find the right words. "I've been feeling... since I got here, things feel different. You feel different, and I don't know what that means, but it's there." His words hung in the air, and I felt my chest tighten, the vulnerability in his voice striking a chord deep within me. I didn't know how to respond, didn't know if I even should, but the pull between us was undeniable. "Luke," I began, my voice trembling, "this is complicated." "I know," he said quickly, stepping closer. "I know it is, but I can't ignore it anymore. I can't pretend I don't feel something." My breath hitched as he reached out, his hand brushing against mine. The touch was light, almost hesitant, but it sent a jolt of electricity through me that I couldn't ignore. "Luke," I said again, my voice barely above a whisper, "we can't." "I know," he interrupted, his voice firm but gentle. "But tell me you don't feel it too." His words stopped me cold, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. The truth was there, staring me in the face, and I couldn't deny it any longer. "I do," I admitted, my voice trembling. "But that doesn't mean—" "I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly, his hazel eyes earnest. "I just needed you to know." The vulnerability in his voice broke something inside me, and before I could think, I reached out, placing my hand on his arm. His skin was warm beneath my touch, and I felt him tense before relaxing under my fingers. "Luke," I said softly, my voice steady now. "This, whatever this is, it's not something we can rush into. We have to be careful." "I know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose you." "You won't," I promised, my hand tightening on his arm. "But we have to take things slow. We have to think this through." He nodded, his gaze never leaving mine. "Okay, slow. I can do that." For a moment we stood there, the silence between us heavy, but no longer uncomfortable. It was as if we had both acknowledged the storm brewing between us, agreeing to navigate it together, one cautious step at a time.